Hi, everyone. Thank you, as always, for listening and today watching. We have a special guest today. I won't give his last name yet. I'll save that for him. But we have joining us Bill. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for coming on. Looking forward to hearing your story, hearing your input, and your experiences. So thank you for agreeing to do this. Before we get started, I have a question for you, Bill.
Fire away.
If the internet had a boat, where would they park it?
Don't know.
Google Docs, of course.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So now, all right, moving on. So thank you for that. So today is another episode of Let's Talk to a quote-unquote real person, real retiree, just to hear their stories, their experiences, their background, their words of wisdom to everyone listening about their particular journeys in planning and living their own retirements. So for the record, what is your name, please, Bill? Full name.
I am Bill Stevenson. I found about this podcast from your Facebook group. I was a relatively early joiner on that group, although I think Facebook itself prodded it. But I've been active since then.
Yeah, and thank you. I don't know the exact date, but you are one of the earlier joiners, and you've been a very active contributor. You have very well thought out and thorough responses. I know. I appreciate. I'm sure the group appreciates as well. So thank you for that. State. What state do you live in?
My wife and I live in Hawaii currently, and that's an important caveat because we likely have an impending move coming up.
Okay. Are willing and able to share? Or if not, tell me it's none of my business.
Sure. So I retired in 2019, but my wife has not yet joined me in retirement. So we have gone through a number of retirement plans.
Okay.
And at the start of last year, we had a plan that would have had my wife retiring at the end of 2024, joining me in retirement, and then us moving to the Nashville area. The one caveat that we both had is that when I retired, sort of more background, I did 30 years in the Navy. My wife did 20 years in the Navy. So she retired in 2010. I retired in 2019. My wife, for her experience, took a very long break after retirement for the Navy, which for her is a 3-day weekend. And then she started up a second career as a Navy civil servant.
Okay.
And when I retired in 2019, basically I said, she had largely followed me during the Navy career. And I said, do whatever you want, and I'll support it. And so I've been laundry and other things of that nature, but also quite a bit of time taking care of her father in a cancer fight, which was successful and all. But while doing that, while I was doing that, she kept getting promoted. And so her last final thing that we discussed was, well, unless you get offered a senior executive position, she's going to retire at the end of 2024. And she has now gotten the tentative job offer for a senior executive position, which would involve a move to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So I'm happily retired, but she has not yet joined me in that regard. So it looks like sometime in this spring, we will probably move to Washington, D.C. for 2 or 3 years.
Got it. Well, first, thank you both for your service. It's very much appreciated. And so you said 2 to 3 years. Is there a particular timeline or impetus for why 2 to 3 years when your wife stops working, or is that just sort of what you're both kind of guessing?
So in theory, she's signing a commitment to do 3 years. Okay. And at the same point in time, she was going to be eligible to retire in essentially December, January, a year from now. And that was our original plan. And financially, we were able to support her retiring. But she has some personal goals and professional goals that she wants to accomplish. So I'll support her for that. But at the same time, her mom experienced a medical issue when she was around 61, 62 that resulted in her going on dialysis. And that significantly impeded her mom from ever doing any travel after that. And so as a result, I have, I'm very, very supportive, but at the same time, I also want to point out to her that there's a go-go period, and we need to make sure we take advantage of that travel. And so there's a balancing act, as you would imagine in any marriage, and that's those are the two things I'm trying to balance with my wife.
Okay. And what are your ages, if you don't mind sharing? At least you. I don't know about your wife, but
I am 57, and my wife is about 18 months younger than I am.
Okay, so 56, 57.
Yep.
Got it. All right. Thank you for that. I'm just curious, what did you do in the Navy? Are you able to say, or if you tell me?
I was in the submarine force, and my wife was in the Civil Engineer Corps.
Oh, cool. Okay. So you were in submarines, like on submarines?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. For the first 20 years, I was assigned to various submarines. I did a command tour in charge of a shore support group for submarines. And then my last decade, I was working in submarine squadrons, doing rides on boats, pointing out, looking at how their operations are, trying to improve efficiency, trying to help them, trying to, hey, this is great. And then I could take it to other submarines and share that. I also spent about last 7 years was at the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, where I was in charge of getting boats in and out of the shipyard and back to sea, and I would ride all their sea trials and things like that. Submarines, by the time a submarine does a sea trial, goes to the next one, the entire crews change over twice. And so my job was to be that continuity for sea trials from one to the other, and share experiences, lessons learned, and hopefully sage advice.
Right. Well, again, thank you. That sounds cool, and you did us all great service, so appreciate it. Some general questions. What are your financial goals and priorities for your retirement? You already sort of touched on travel and doing what you can while you can, but anything big or in particular?
From a financial, really more travel and I'll say gifting. That could be charitable, that could be support to whatever the things. And that also bleeds over into some non-financial. I've been a vice president of a group here in Hawaii, which I resigned when I realized we were about to move. But I've also been volunteering at a local high school to judge for their speech and debate team. My younger daughter had been very active in speech and debate for a number of years. And so I kind of continue to support that particular endeavor, even though she's now graduated.
Okay. Oh, very cool. And how old are your children?
So my daughters are 29 and 22.
Okay.
The 29-year-old is in her last year of medical residency. She will an OBGYN. However, she is not yet ready to join the full-time workforce. And so in July, she will start a 3-year fellowship in maternal fetal medicine up in roughly your neck of the woods, specifically Connecticut.
Okay.
So, and my younger daughter is also, while she finished undergraduate, also was not quite ready to start the workforce. So she is at the University of Chicago School of Law and just finished her first quarter there.
Oh, great. And I ask this for purposes of, to the extent that kids are still in your plans or otherwise sort of impact your retirement planning, And
they
like they're on their way for the most part, right?
They're mostly independent. My younger daughter has her budget. She tracks her stuff on the, and however, we do have still connections. Specifically, she's having to look for an internship, and she applied to a number of places in Washington, D.C., anticipating that she would have a home with us there for her to crash in as part of the internship. So there's still connections. And my older daughter is looking forward to us meeting up and doing some East Coast things when her in Connecticut and us in D.C.
Okay. And just stepping back, you said the plan was maybe move to Nashville. Obviously now change with DC. I guess that's where the job's going to be. But where did Nashville come into play?
So my mother-in-law passed away in 2014. My mother-in-law and father-in-law both lived in Hawaii, and that was part of the reason we were here. Dual military, having family nearby has many advantages. to allow us to do our mission. But about a couple of years after my mother-in-law passed away, my father-in-law remarried to an older woman, and I said because she's 2 years older than I am. So they have recently transitioned to living in the Philippines. My wife was born in the Philippines, moved to Hawaii when she was 4. But my parents are both about 81, and they live in Western Kentucky in a rural area called Hopkinsville. My wife has told me I'm welcome to retire to Hopkinsville as long as I give her time to arrange for the divorce. But because she loves urban and sunny, and Nashville is only about an hour and 15 minutes from my parents, so close enough to support them, and yet meet the requirements of my wife of being urban and having lots of activities and things to do. Right. So it seems like a good place. We've done several scouting trips there, checking out condos and things of that nature. And in the fall, my wife accompanied me to Nashville while I was in a bridge tournament, and she did an entire week of her own scouting and agreed that she would be happy there and will go forth. Okay. We do have a flow chart plan that would put us, at maybe after 5-10 years in Nashville, we would reevaluate whether that was good. If we're happy, great, and if we're not, then I might sell that condo and buy one near each daughter, who by that time may have actually settled to someplace they're actually going to be, right, and then visit whichever one has better weather.
Okay. That's great analysis. All right. So general retirement planning questions. I know you know your stuff really well. That's clearly evidence from your contributions in the Facebook group. But when did you start getting serious about retirement planning for yourself?
And I'll kind of clarifies it. My last semester in college, while I was in college, I had a Navy ROTC scholarship, and they required you to take 15 credit hours a semester to keep the scholarship. Well, my last semester, I only needed 12 credit hours to graduate. So I scratched my head and signed up for a 3-credit financial planning class or personal finance class. And that opened up my eyes on a number of things, on probably more the accumulation as opposed to retirement planning, differentiate that. And so, but as soon as I started the Navy, I opened our IRAs for both my wife and I, was funding those. She was a year behind me, so I had a year of Navy training before we got back together again. So the accumulation stage started very early. The retirement planning, we went through a few iterations. We had a discussion about both retiring at around the 20-year point, made a decision not to do that. Then my wife had not liked her, or rather had not really happy with her job. And so when she knew I was going to retire in 2019, her original plan was to retire roughly at the end of 2019, about 6 months after I did. And then she informed me that she no longer disliked her job. She hated her job and was going to retire at the same time I did. And then about a week after that conversation, she got offered a new job, did a lateral, loved it. Then a year later, she got a promotion. And so then all of that has reinvigorated her, and she's happy. And in fact, I had discussions now. She literally said, "Oh, I would do this even if they didn't pay me." So I'm.
Don't tell them that.
I did mention that, but nevertheless, it's accomplishing a number of very deep-seated personal and professional goals for my wife. It also is related to the fact that we have different upbringing. My dad's a retired Air Force colonel, and I was raised, in a middle-class family. My father-in-law immigrated to the U.S. based on getting a job in the U.S. Navy as enlisted, working as a junior enlisted person. Brought his parents or his kids over, and such, eventually, and it was. I certainly think they had no problems having food on the table, but they never went out to eat. Right? I think my wife said that during her entire childhood, they did one trip and that was to go stay with some relatives in California, and they visited Disney once, and that was, her life's vision on travel was that. And so she starts every financial planning conversation with, "Will we starve?"
Right.
And that's kind of her. So we have a different mindset from that perspective, and so I have to understand that question's coming for every conversation, and help her evaluate that and make her understand.
It's interesting that you said that, and it's so true. There's different words for it. I've heard the term money script, but basically just your personal experiences and beliefs and values, that a lot of which are so instilled at an early age from what happened or didn't happen in your life and what your experiences were. And it sounds like in your wife's case, it was that, right? The question's always going to be, do we have enough to eat? Basically, I'm paraphrasing you, but right.
Yep.
Even if objectively the answer is yes, and she knows that, she may never get over that thought, that initial knee-jerk reaction of, are we going to starve? So that's interesting.
Absolutely. And as a result, when I kind of reached the point where, hey, I think we've saved enough to retire, that was, having enough was not going to work. And so we've now crossed into probably the oversaved phase, because that's what I need to make my wife comfortable with the concept of retirement.
And has she gotten more comfortable as you've continued to oversave?
She has, and she's definitely has. It's just, but it's a reality that I have to recognize and integrate into my planning.
Right. So just bringing it back to retirement planning knowledge, what sources, content, et cetera, did you use in learning about the retirement, the decumulation aspect of things?
So I started off with Jane Bryant Quinn. She's written a couple of, she's not a financial planner, but more of a reporter, but a financial reporter. I started off with her, and then I went off into some Wade Fowle books, some of his early works, which are very deep, I would say. Right. I enjoyed reading them. I got a lot out of them, but they're deep. His book, Retirement Planning Guidebook, is really the one I would point to as a go-to, because it brings it back to, it's got some depth, but it's got a lot more speaking to the average person than I would say his earlier books do. Right. Also, and a key difference is, I really think his Retirement Planning Guidebook had a huge change or revelation in his mind, because he went from trying to advocate a particular way as better into pointing out that there are a number of different completely workable retirement income plans that can all work, and you just need to figure out which of those plans works best for you. Right. And not try and say, well, this is the optimum one and everyone should use that. And so I found that aspect of his newest book to be, I really like that aspect, because it identified that what works for you is great. It might not work for me, right, but they can both be just fine. Yeah. And so that was one of my fans. And then, of course, Facebook book. And so in addition to your various contributions, the Retirement and IRA show. Yes. Every morning, especially since wife works, I go off and do a walk. And so I'll listen to various podcasts. And I am... and if you're familiar with their podcast, I am the classic Vanguard engineer. Right.
That's a good one. That's I'd probably say my favorite podcast. It was a huge inspiration to me. I personally learned a lot out of it, and I would highly recommend that to anyone who wants to really learn about retirement planning knowledge. Now, I know how I'd answer this question on your behalf, but how do you rate your knowledge of financial planning, tax planning issues, et cetera?
Well, I think it's very good, but I also think it's important to keep learning. And so for example, I like, one of my favorite things to put on is, if I make a comment and someone adds something to it, which is, I think, useful, I will commend them for a great ad. That's because those kinds of things, and I want to highlight that I'm comfortable with the additions, because that's how I learn as well.
So now, regarding financial aspects of retirement planning, what do you wish you would have known or done differently when you were younger?
I'm actually pretty happy with my accumulation stage. I wasted a little bit of time on some active funds in conjunction with index funds, and then when when we bought our first house, I emptied out in all the active funds and called that the down payment for the house, and just permanently stayed with index funds since then. So, in one sense, it was probably inefficient, but it was still. I learned something, and I found a convenient time to undo the mistake.
Right. And they probably more or less did you well enough, right? And in hindsight, could have done better with index funds.
Yeah, I would think that. I had, as a young, just out of college, I decided, I'll pick the best performing fund from, and that turned out to be a bad plan. So, 20th Century Ultra or something like that. Anyway, so it had its days, and it was not when I was a member of that club.
Yeah.
So,
got it.
But lesson learned. I'm happy now. It was inexpensive lesson learned in retrospect. So
sure, could have been worse. And just for everyone listening, any references to actual funds, fund companies, securities, nothing in this podcast is to be taken or misconstrued as any specific investment advice or recommendations. It is not. It's just Bill's thoughts, Bill's views, Bill's experiences with what he has done in his life so far. So non-financial aspects, anything you wish you'd have known or done differently along the way?
So I'll tell this story, which is, so in 2018, I realized at that point that I had two hobbies in life. One was raising children, and the other was being in the Navy. And that I looked at my retirement orders, and I realized that on June 1st of 2019, I was going to retire from the Navy. And on that same day, my youngest daughter was going to graduate from high school. So I needed a new hobby. And so I discovered the joy of bridge. I had a friend who I'd been taught it years ago, but I'd kind of lost it. But I had a friend who is a bridge instructor at the shipyard. I took some classes with him, and I done it. And from my wife's perspective, it was important that I have a hobby that did not involve her, and that definitely meets it. My wife's family has a long history of card games. Unfortunately, their history with card games involves the men losing at poker and putting food on the table in question. As a result, all the women were taught that card games are inherently evil, and so she will never join me in bridge, but is thrilled that I have a hobby. And she also likes the fact that I will occasionally travel to bridge tournaments, and she can get travel while I do bridge. So.
And bridge, I don't know much about it other than I believe it's really technical and involved. Did you know any bridge prior to starting with the guy you know from the base? Or
so I knew the basics of it, and I knew around 2000, my wife and I had done a cruise, and I'd taken a few classes on the cruise, but I hadn't. Basically, I've been a decade or close to a decade since I hadn't done anything, maybe even longer. And in reality, basically, I had to relearn how it is because they had markedly changed the bidding process during that time. What I like best about bridge is that it allows me to accomplish two goals in retirement. One is you will never stop learning about bridge because it's like an onion. Once you learn this layer, there's another layer and another layer underneath. And so it's intellectually stimulating. And at the same time, it's social because you're doing it with people, you're interacting with people the whole time. And I thought those are two important goals that I needed to adopt as part of my retirement. And this met both of those.
Yeah, that's hugely important. In groups like the Facebook group, it's really easy to nerd out on technical stuff, which I'm not saying it's not important, but so many people have said, I've heard firsthand and have witnessed it firsthand, the non-financial aspects. And that's why I'm asking, like specifically financial question, non-financial question, the meaning, the purpose, the fulfillment, the reason to get up and do something every day, the socialization, all that stuff really matters, right?
It does. And so, again, we're moving in the near future, so I've had to curtail. But for the last, since post-COVID, I have been directing a group of about 32 senior citizens once a week as we play bridge out in Kailua, which is a subdivision out on the north side of the island. And so it's been a very rewarding rebuilding a group post-COVID. in that we started at 3 tables. We're now up to we've had 10 tables. And so it's a lot, it's a big group, big growing group. And at the same time, it's a friendly group. And that's been really my focus. Its goal is to have fun. There's no one from that group is ever going to win a world championship at bridge, but they're all going to have fun, and that's what I care about.
Yeah, right. I'm just going to flip these next 2 questions. After looking over them, it seems like the ordering logically should be reversed a little bit. Do you have a significant other, which you do, and clearly you're the one, I'm assuming you're the one who's the most actively engaged in your planning and finances in the household. What's your views? What's your approach? Is your wife at all involved? Does she have nothing to do with it? What's sort of longer term plans if you're, God forbid, predecease her? What would happen?
Yes, I would. I do the majority of the planning and discussions, but at the same time, I try to involve her at least once a month. Every other month, we'll have some financial discussion. I'll drag her over. We'll talk about Quicken, see what the numbers say, make those kind of comparisons. And recently, we went through a discussion on philosophy for retirement planning, and the key part on that was when I was nerding out on the early Wade Pfau books and some others of that nature. I came up with some really technical, really complicated ways and of doing retirement planning. And then I was listening to Retirement IRA Show, and I decided to adopt a completely different approach of much more keep it simple approach. And so as a result, I don't think it's going to be that difficult for my wife to make a transition. I've literally created a retirement plan that requires about one decision a year, and it's designed to be a decision of yes, no. And so that's about as simple as I can get. It's probably not optimum in other ways, but it seems pretty close to it. It works and it's simple. So that's what I was interested in.
And that's important, definitely. Do you use an advisor, or if not now, have you ever? And what is or was your feedback experience?
We do not use a financial advisor. My wife and I explored that relatively early in our time in the Navy. My first experience was with a former Navy person who was in the Orlando area, part of a large national group, who discussed lots of the Navy experience and was very friendly and wonderful, and explained the beauty of whole life insurance and heavily loaded mutual funds. Eventually, we reached the point of, I think he's a friendly person, but this is not for us. Subsequently, that particular company ended up with an SEC major thing and numerous lawsuits, all related to the fact that they were taking advantage of junior military people with their whole process. And so I was glad I never went in that route. But I left a very negative taste in the mouth. Another one at our first duty station together, the joys of variable annuities came up, and that was the focus of him. I didn't go that route. And the last one, who said he was going to do a financial plan, well, really what it boiled down to was him trying to get me to go into loaded funds or 12B1 fees and a RET or EIT thing that obviously in retrospect, he was getting some bonus pay to put people in. Sure. So all three of those left me with a very negative taste. At the time, Vanguard offered free financial plans to people who were there. That was useful, certainly worth every penny we paid for it. But it was, they no longer offer that as a free service. And but I've been fairly happy with learning on my own and focusing on a simple plan, and being able to interact in the Facebook group, I think is useful because you can put forth discussions and get, I'll say, crowdsourcing feedback. And between your podcasts and your comments, as well as Retirement IRA Show, I feel that there's a lot of good banter and discussion and bringing me back in case I had a crazy idea that needed to be reined in.
Right. And thanks for sharing your experience with, I'll call them advisors. I mean, the folks you talked to, I think really weren't advisors by my definition. That's unfortunately very common a lot of the industry was and still is, especially the larger places that many people have probably heard of, household name places. It's about production. It's about incentives to sell this versus that. There's targets and goals people have to hit. And not to say people doing that are bad people. Like, I'm sure the person in the Navy, I'm sure he's one of the most upstanding people you ever meet. I have no reason to think otherwise. They're just in bad environments, bad structures where
they're responding to incentives.
Yes, exactly.
That's, yeah.
So I'm glad you were able to see through it at least, and didn't get yourself too wrangled into some squirrely mess you didn't want to be in. So, all right. So now some technical questions about you in your planning. So if you retired before 65, which you did, and not yet eligible for Medicare, what do you do for health insurance? Now I suspect the answer may be military comes into play here, but
yeah, my wife and I are both eligible for both TRICARE and VA based on. So we have really two. The VA care is free, and we also carry TRICARE as well, slightly more broad and availability. VA is good when you can make a scheduled appointment and things of that nature. Emergency care is typically better with TRICARE type of arrangement.
Yeah. And not to get too off topic here, but does TRICARE carry through the rest of your life, or do you have to switch or can switch to Medicare at 65?
So the answer is yes. So there's TRICARE as our current age. We pay a premium associated with TRICARE, and that continues through age 65.
Okay.
At 65, we transition to Medicare, but we also have what's called TRICARE for Life, which serves the function of one of the supplement plans, except that it's free, right? So it works as a Medicare supplement, covers, which really is, my parents have been using TRICARE for Life since they turned 65, and basically they've had like 1 or 2 medical bills since they turned 65, because as long as you're using regular Medicare, the doctor submits the bill to Medicare. Medicare pays the part they pay, and then they just automatically send the rest of it off to TRICARE for Life, and they don't have to pay anything. So so that process works well, and has reached a point where it's a finely tuned machine. You just have to tell the doctor that you're on. For my parents' case, and I'm not yet there, but my parents' case, they say we're on Medicare, they file with Medicare, and then that's all taken care of from there.
That's basically it. Yeah. Okay. What's your Social Security strategy for you and your wife?
So that's a good question. One of us will apply at 62. The plan nominally was for my wife to do so because we have a very similar earnings history. And so she's 18 months younger. She would start at 62. And then I would start later. The definition of later depends a bit on the legislative risk as we actually get to that age. If my read of Congress is that they're going to be doing something that might result in it being beneficial to start earlier, then I would do that. Otherwise, I'd delay. Certainly want to delay until I finish Roth conversions. So that would just to give myself more window and room for Roth conversions. So my wife at 62 and me when we're done with Roth conversions or later would be my answer. I'm not really ready. Something's got to happen with Social Security, and I need to see the nature of what happens with it to be able to answer that question more fully. I think I certainly, my wife and I would be subject to legislative risk, so I see that as the one thing we have to keep track of. I certainly know what the numbers say, and I know how to actuarially determine the right answer. Legislative risk is something that it's not really number based. You have to play that by ear.
Sure. And I'll come back to the Roth conversion question in a second. I do want to dig a little on what your reason is for doing conversions and why. But being in the military, I assume you both have pensions. Can you just touch on that briefly? And does that impact your Social Security claiming decision versus if you were, civilian and did not have pensions, either of you?
So it does. And in fact, that's kind of a better way to answer your question would be to explain my retirement income plan.
Okay.
And then, so the foundation for the retirement income plan is my wife and I both have pensions, and as well as some VA disability. And that, to steal from another podcast, that more than meets our minimum dignity floor. In truth, if one of us passed away, we would lose like 45% of their other military pension, but we would still have enough to more than meet the minimum dignity floor. It gets into some fun travel or gifting kind of thing. So with that fully covered, based on the combined pension of the two of us, that allowed for a more interesting approach to retirement planning. And so our approach has been, we have when my wife joins me in retirement, we will have about 2 to 3 years of cash sitting in basically we'll say a money market account. Might not entirely be that, but some just cash. And the rest of it will be in index equity funds like Vanguard, Total, or whatever, stuff like that. Yep. And so it'll be, because that would result in, if I look only at the portfolio, being about 95+% equities, which would seem to be, but if you look broader, it's really 50% pension, because if you do the net present value, it's like 50% of fixed income from the pension, right, and then 50% equity. So I don't think it's that crazy a number, because of the unique pension system that set up that my wife and I have. And so in theory, the only decision built into the process is we would have without a decision, all the dividends would just go into the money market account, essentially. Okay. And we'll say that's nominally 2%. And then if the market is up, we'll sell 3% and add that to the cash fund. And if the market is down, we won't. So therefore, it'll be, one year might have 5%, another year would have 5%, and the next year is down, so it's 2%. Yep. And the rough swag works out to about 4% a year. That's not the 4% rule. Very, very different, right? Because it's literally 4% of whatever's in the portfolio would feed into the cash buffer, and the cash buffer really serves to two purposes. One, that's where gifting and travel will come from. Okay. And it also serves by being that 3-year buffer that I don't really care if the market was down for 1 or 2 years, because I got this buffer to insulate me from the market variability. Right.
That's a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up for people listening that may hear, you're retired. How can you possibly be okay with a 95% stock allocation, or whatever your number is? And what people have to realize, and when you read these stories, like the rules of thumb that you should have X amount saved, or you need this much stock percentage by the time you're whatever age, like just throw it out. In your case, you have sizable pensions, you'll have Social Security. You said those things, pensions alone, right, more than cover.
Pensions alone would be it, yes. So yeah. Social Security is just icing on the top.
Yeah. So with that said, if your stock portfolio were to drop 60%, let's just say, just to pick up a horrible number, you're still okay financially, right? Objectively. Emotionally, maybe a different story. It sounds like your wife might lose some sleep over it, and that's an issue that needs to be factored into your analysis and stuff. But you're an example where you can be ultra aggressive with the investable assets you do have, because you have such large guaranteed income, or vice versa. This is where it gets hard to pick a right allocation. You don't need your money to grow to finance your future. So you could let it be ultra conservative, just park it all in cash at one extreme, right? Either one of those extremes could be okay for you, or anywhere in the middle, which makes it complicated. So people really need to tune out like the dogmatic rules of thumb without knowing each person's specific risk views, guaranteed income, expenses, et cetera. It's impossible to start to come up with what's the right amount of riskiness for you. So,
yeah, the plan I've described works great for us, but it would not work for the average person, because they don't have the foundational pensions that my wife and I do. Right. That's a critical piece. And that's why I think, to steal from Cody, in our case, personal finance is very personal.
Yes, it is. 100% is. All right. So Roth conversions, let's come back to that. You said part of the reason for delaying Social Security is to get Roth conversions done in the interim. spill. What's your view on conversions? What are you doing them and why? What's your end game with them?
So the key piece that I stolen from the retirement and IRA show is that from a couple perspective, we're going to be at the top of the 24%, or be in the 24% tax bracket ad nauseum.
Yeah.
And so the Roth conversions will not really help us as a couple. But there are several reasons why it would be helpful, because if one of us passes, the other one is the one that's left behind is no longer in the 24% tax bracket. They will instantly jump up to the 32 or higher percentage. And so the Roth conversions would support the widow. As I alluded to, both daughters are also, while currently not being paid very well, they're both in professions that will be paid very well in the foreseeable future. And so giving them large traditional holdings during their peak earning years just seems like a waste from a tax planning perspective. Right. So there's many advantages not related to the couple that support us doing Roth conversions. And so when my wife joins me in retirement and we move to Tennessee, which interesting enough has no state income tax, at that point in time, after we're settled in Tennessee residence, we will do Roth conversions. However, we're certainly not going to convert everything. I specifically have a like 300 to 500K or something like that, which we want to leave in traditional, and that it will be our long-term care self-funding pool. And also that size is not going to, the RMDs from that is not going to boost either of us or even just one of us up into another tax bracket. So it's sufficiently getting it down that the RMDs are not going to impact us. At the same time, it keeps it available for long-term care self-funding. I think that the biggest concern for long-term care self-funding in our case, based on our pensions, is the first one who goes into long-term care while the other one is still at home. That's the time when I would expect to need or want to use that money to fund it if necessary.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And we already talked about your plans or potential plans to move, relocate, et cetera. But the house, or do you have a house, I guess is a question. Do you own, do you rent now?
So we currently own. My plan, which was successfully executed, was to get the mortgage paid off about 18 months before my retirement. Okay. And a little prepayments during that time allowed that to happen. And then the last 18 months, I continued to pay myself the mortgage and to begin to build up that cash buffer that I alluded to. Again, recognize at that time I started that, I was expecting my wife was going to join me in retirement then. That hasn't worked out to be the case, but that was the plan. And I like that plan, even though it turns out to have been a little premature based on her joining the retirement date. But nevertheless, that worked. And it also meant that there was very nice cash flow once I retired and stuff of that nature. So it's been low stress. In fact, during COVID, when none of us were traveling, we were investing basically my wife's salary at that point. Now that I'm free to travel more, that's not quite that successful, but nevertheless, it's been good.
Good. We already chatted about investment allocations, distribution strategies, et cetera. So thanks for covering those. Next, this is. To more fully. When we live in DC, we're going to rent because it's a 2 to 3 year period. So we're just going to rent. And we're also going to take advantage of this time to do downsizing. And specifically because we're currently in a 2,400 square foot house, and we're going to try and go to a 1,200 square foot condo or apartment kind of thing, and live there with the goal of my wife being able close enough to walk to work, and try to go down to one car for that time frame. So Washington D.C. has the metro system and such that we think, and if she's walking to work thing, in fact, our goal would be for me to walk with her to work and see her off at work, and then I go to the gym. But that's. And longer term, so beyond Washington, perhaps
We will buy once we get to Nashville.
Okay. And even then, you said to be determined where you may not necessarily stay there. Depends where the kids end up, right? Yeah.
It's variable. The younger daughter has discussed her plan for post law school is to go work for big law for like 5 years and get some money and such, and then at that point she's going to evaluate whether she likes big law or not, and if she does, great, and if she doesn't, then she'll look for a mid-sized town and join a law firm in that environment. And currently, the Nashville area is very high on her list, so that would support us staying there. But there's a lot of variables between now and then, and too many to be certain about anything. So we got a flow chart. It's got lots of paths, and we talk about the options, and not long enough not to execute things. Although we have a realtor in Nashville who we visited several times and had her walk us around and look at condos. So when the fall when we were there, we stayed at 2 different hotels because we wanted to experience the walkability of 2 different neighborhoods. Sure. And by actually being there. And so that was, I think, we both found that very eye-opening, because there was one neighborhood that we expected to really like that was not as enticing as we wanted, and another one which my wife did not expect to like that she now loves. So it was an absolutely huge payoffs on that particular visit.
Yeah, good. I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad you learned a lot from it. All right, this final block of questions here is for people who are already retired. Those who aren't yet, I guess, can't quite have meaningful responses to these, but since you are retired, let's do it. How did you find the emotional transition of going from saving assets to, normally I'd say decumulating spending assets, but it sounds like in your case, you're not actually.
Yeah, we are. Right? Yeah, I'm retired, but I would not say we're in the decumulation stage yet. Decumulation stage planning and preparation, but we aren't really there. I really think that though that we probably oversaved, and so I'm not terribly concerned about that aspect. I have a bigger challenge of trying to spend.
Yeah,
probably be our bigger challenge.
So you, as a couple, I guess you're not fully retired yet, so some of these might not really fit well, these questions, but what I like to ask folks is, what expenses did you that are higher than you thought they'd be in retirement, and vice versa? What's actually less than you thought they'd be?
I really don't know. Nothing. The higher expenses haven't really impacted lifestyle or anything of that nature. So I really don't see a significant change. The cost of moving, as I've looked at that, and although then I realized with my wife now getting this job, the government will pay for the move, and realizing how much of that is going to save was a nice blessing. But it was looking at it before that came along, I was looking like a fairly bleak expense.
Especially coming from Hawaii across, to the East Coast, right?
yeah, exactly right. I was not looking forward to that. But what expenses are less, and that's college would be the answer on that. My daughter's college expenses was dramatically less than I had expected. In large part, that has been because of my daughters, and then also in large part due to post 9/11 GI Bill, which is unique to those who served in the military. And they've done it differently. My older daughter selected an expensive private college in the Midwest, but that particular college, when she made that decision, she knew that their participation in post 9/11 GI Bill and the associated Yellow Ribbon program was such that that expensive private college was free. Okay. And that included the housing costs were also free. And so consequently, she narrowed her list of colleges down to only those that were going to be free and chose from that. And her specific question, which I still love to this day, was, hey, if I choose a college that's free, does the money in the 529, can I use that to pay for med school? And I'm like, absolutely, dear. You absolutely can. And so post 9/11 GI Bill covered her undergrad and essentially covered the first year of med school. That allowed the 529 money to largely cover the rest of her med school. So she graduated debt-free from med school.
Great.
Because she chose a school that was meshed well with post 9/11 GI Bill. Post 9/11 GI Bill helped, but also because for med school she lived at home, and so her housing expenses, got zeroed out, and she was able to. The first semester, which was covered by the remainder of the post 9/11 GI Bill, she was getting a housing allowance, but just banking it to pay for the next semester of med school. And so that her decisions and her thoughtful integration of the benefit allowed her to do that. That meant that only the money that we'd saved in the 529, which was sufficient. And then my younger daughter took a different approach, which was she chose an mid-priced private college in the Midwest as well. But she, as a result of that choice, she got a 60% scholarship from the college, and she got several additional group scholarships. And so she used some of her 529 to pay for undergrad, but now she's at the University of Chicago School of Law, which is not cheap, right. But it's free to her because now she's using my post 9/11 GI Bill to pay for that, because my wife's post 9/11 GI Bill paid for my older daughter, and mine is paying for the younger daughter.
Oh, I didn't know it can be ported over to children.
So the answer is it depends, which I find is the correct answer to almost every question.
It is.
If you join the military and you get out after one or even maybe 2 tours, it's for you, but only you. If you stay past like 6 to 10 years and then you agree to sign up for 4 more, then you can now transfer it to your spouse or kids. And so from the Navy's or the military perspective, if they get you to sign up for that additional, you're going to stay till retirement, right? So there's a payoff from their perspective. Mm-hmm. But so if you join the military and you retire from there, you can have at least one child's post college paid for. In fact, I had while I was in the military, I'd had lunch on a number of occasions with a friend named Mac, and I discussed the concept of transferring post 9/11 GI Bill to him, and eventually beat it into his head that he should transfer it to his daughter. And lo and behold, last year, which was like about a decade later, he and his wife came to Hawaii and said, "We're taking you to supper at a fancy restaurant." I said, "Why?" "Because we finally realized how much money we're saving because of your talking to me." And he said it was life-changing. My daughter was so just eyes open, everything, all because of that transfer of post 9/11 GI Bill thing. So
that's great. That's incredibly helpful. What did you think would be more difficult or challenging about retirement than it actually is?
So I was certainly concerned about trying to create a new friend network kind of stuff. We still live here, so got some of that. But in my case, getting involved in the Bridge group opened up 20 more social interactions from that. I get to try that again when we go to DC. We have a number of friends from either college or the military who live in DC, so I'll have a starting ground, but I'll get to try and involve myself in that local Bridge group or whatever other social activities I can find in there.
Okay.
My wife's already sort of sneaking that out. She's joined Facebook groups for the Nashville area, as an example, trying to find out what places they like to eat and other things of that nature, as
sure.
Trying her laying groundwork.
Good. Yeah, it makes sense. Why not, right? Go as prepared as you can be. What was the worst or most inaccurate advice you were given about retirement?
So what I found most frustrating has been the number of people who have described, you have to do it this way, mm-hmm. and they need to fit you into their mold for retirement planning. And I dislike that. I reject that idea. I think that there are various different possible answers that are all good. There's not a one right answer. As I mentioned before, my favorite answer to almost every single question is it depends, because there's nuances and there's factors to consider that are unique to every person and every situation. And so a particular radio announcer who's got his certain number of steps on solving all financial problems, that may in fact work for many people, but it doesn't work for everyone.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means they're different.
Yep. Well said. I can't agree with you more. What were the most surprising financial and non-financial things about retiring?
I guess the most surprising non-financial might be related to that, which is how hard it's been to get my wife to join me in retirement. That would be the hardest non-financial. I like how scalable some hobbies are, though, from a financial. Like, you can play bridge and not spend hardly any money. You can play bridge and go to large numbers of tournaments scattered around the country and spend lots of money and do lots of traveling. And it's a very scalable activity, and there's true probably for other things. I have friends who've gotten addicted to this thing called pickleball, and I follow them, and I see them going to tournaments around the East Coast and other stuff of that nature. It's very similar in that regard. It's scalable. You can play pickleball in your local neighborhood, right, or you can go to tournaments. It's up to you. So you get to choose what level that you want to delve into your hobbies. To some degree, you have to learn to say no to various requests, I would suspect. But on the other hand, if it's the hobby that you've decided to focus on, I would recommend that you try and say yes to some of that. So I think that as a vice president of the local bridge group here, I had some positive influence and helped accomplish some things. And probably useful activity for other people. But it's scalable. That's my point, is that you can decide what level works for you, and the answer might be one level for one activity and a different level for another one.
Right. Some people may play pickleball once a week, once every other week. Some play daily, and to your point, travel who knows where to be involved in pickleball activities. So good. All right. Final question. If you can give only one piece of advice or guidance to others about retirement planning, what would it be?
Have a simple, straightforward plan, which can be summarized as you have to have a plan. But you want to have a simple, straightforward plan, and not something overly robust and overly complicated, rather, would be what you'd want to avoid.
Yeah, which is great advice and hard for some to do. They're wired to be super quantitative and want to solve things to the nth degree. And so much about retirement planning, especially the financial aspects of things, can't be solved for, or there's multiple ways it can be solved for, like you said before, about approaches towards income planning or whatever. So very well said.
I mean, there's tactical aspects for the planning, but the strategic plan needs to be simple and straightforward.
Yeah. And something you can actually execute, right? If it's so unwieldy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And the Navy would use the phrase, how do you operationalize that? You have to take the good idea fairy and convert it into something that you can actually execute.
Right. Because otherwise it's not going to matter.
Yep.
All right. Very helpful. This was great. Any final words of wisdom here, Bill?
I love your show. I love your interaction, and I love the Facebook group. And I've been very happy with the interactions there with various people. I also particularly like how you and your team have been rigorous in keeping sales team off of it. I did, in fact, have a couple people early on who approached me about the joys of fixed index annuity, and that was their first conversation with me. And within 24 hours, those people were banned from your group. So I commend the awesome team that is the retirement education team.
They're great. It is like whack-a-mole, trying to knock down salespeople, spammers, fake profiles, crypto traders, whatever. But it's worth it. It's well worth the work. So much thanks to everyone who's involved in the group, either as a participant who flags and raises inappropriate posts for us to see, because there's no way we can see them on our own otherwise. And thanks to all the moderators for putting all the time. So, well, awesome. Bill, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. It was very helpful, and I had fun chatting with you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All righty. Take care.